If you're serious about military history, civil defense, and survival engineering, you're in the right place. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to Iron Age Instincts and, well, share this video with someone who still believes modern safety systems are inherently superior. What you're about to hear isn't pop history. It's a hard look at one of the most effective civilian shelters ever devised, so effective that governments quietly made sure it never became common knowledge after the war. Most people assume World War II air raid shelters were crude, desperate constructions thrown together under pressure. That assumption is wrong. One particular shelter design worked so well that post-war authorities considered it politically dangerous. It didn't just protect civilians, it undermined the narrative that only centralized, state-controlled infrastructure could keep populations safe. This shelter was the German Luftschutzkeller evolved into the Hochbunker concept, paired with advanced overpressure management and oxygen recycling methods that rivaled early submarine systems. These weren't improvised basements. They were engineered survival environments capable of withstanding direct hits, firestorms, and prolonged sieges. So, why did these shelters exist, and what were they really meant to solve? Well, by about 1942, the nature of Allied bombing had changed quite a bit. Instead of aiming at just precision targets, the bombers began focusing on entire urban areas. It wasn't just factories anymore, whole districts were being flattened. German civil defense engineers, you see, were handed a rather brutal requirement. They had to create shelters that could withstand collapsing buildings, massive incendiary fires, the sheer force of blast overpressure, and even oxygen depletion. And all of this had to be done while still keeping civilians safe inside for long periods. Quite the challenge, honestly. The answer, in the end, was to build reinforced concrete shelters. These often had walls thicker than 2 meters, with rounded internal corners to help deflect blast waves. They also featured sealed steel doors, pressure relief shafts, and manual air filtration systems. But really, the key innovation was survivability. Not just under direct hits, but also near misses and fire. The combination of all these elements made them remarkably fire-resistant as well. In places like Hamburg, and later on in Dresden, these shelters stayed structurally intact, even when everything above them was burning. Their effectiveness wasn't just down to luck. It was all about understanding the physics behind the threat. That's what made the difference in the end. Blast waves behave like fluid, you know. Flat walls fail. Rounded surfaces redirect force. These shelters were designed with curved ceilings and staggered entry corridors, so shock waves lost energy before reaching occupants. Firestorms were the real killer in World War II cities, not explosives. Temperatures could exceed 800 degrees Celsius, and oxygen was consumed rapidly. The shelters used passive airflow systems with intake and exhaust shafts placed at different heights to create convection, even when mechanical systems failed. In some shelters, hand-crank blowers allowed occupants to maintain breathable air for hours or days. This is where the shelter crossed from protection into independence. Civilians inside didn't rely on external rescue. They could survive until conditions normalized. That independence is precisely what made the design uncomfortable for post-war authorities. After 1945, Europe faced a different kind of threat: political instability. Governments, you see, wanted populations dependent on centralized systems, not self-sufficient in hardened structures that could resist both bombs and authority. Allowing civilians to build shelters that could survive modern weapons raised questions about control, evacuation policies, and, well, compliance during emergencies. In West Germany and much of Europe, strict regulations were introduced, limiting private shelter construction. Wall thickness, blast resistance, and sealed airflow systems were restricted under the guise of safety codes. Officially, the argument was that unregulated shelters could collapse. Unofficially, it was about preventing widespread hardened civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, military versions of the same principles continued to be used, refined, and expanded in command bunkers and NATO facilities. This shelter proves that resilience doesn't require advanced electronics or constant power. It requires understanding structure, airflow, and human endurance. Modern preppers often over-focus on gadgets and underestimate geometry and material science. A practical application today doesn't mean building a wartime bunker in your backyard. It means adopting principles. If reinforcing a basement, curved internal supports and segmented entryways dramatically improve blast and collapse resistance. Fire resistance matters more than explosive resistance in urban environments. Ventilation should never rely on a single powered system. Redundancy can be manual, passive, or mechanical. Even something as simple as placing air intake vents away from ground-level debris zones and exhaust vents higher can mean the difference between survivability and suffocation. These are lessons learned under the harshest conditions imaginable, paid for in lives and refined under pressure. Modern civil defense has largely abandoned the idea of hardened civilian protection in favor of evacuation and warning systems. That works until it doesn't. History shows that shelters don't fail first. Systems do. Power grids fail. Communications collapse. Roads clog. The Second World War shelter addressed those realities head-on. For historians, this shelter challenges the idea that wartime engineering was crude or purely reactive. It was systematic, tested, and frighteningly effective. For survivalists, it's a reminder that true preparedness is quiet, structural, and deeply unglamorous. If you found this valuable, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts, share this with someone who still thinks survival is about gear alone, and stay sharp. History rewards those who actually study it.